Hey YouTube, this is how I made the little circuit board for my coil gun. Here's the little diagram for it. Right here you have the coil and the 4 capacitors and the charging unit. Now, I know I don't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 switches. I only have 6 switches plus the power switch, and that is because I went and bought some dual switches. They can turn 2 things off at the same time. Instead of having to use 9 switches, I only have 3 switches. So really, in reality, this switch is the same as this switch. Same goes for the rest of them. And then these switches to connect the capacitors into series are single switches. So I only have 3 of those and 3 dual switches, plus the dual switch to cut off the unit from the charging circuit. And what this does is, because the capacitors will not charge off the circuit in series, which is when they're connected positive to negative, positive to negative. So what parallel is all the positives and all the negatives are connected together. Like all these negatives are connected together, and then all these positives are connected together into the charging circuit. And that way it can charge up. And once the charging is complete, the power to the charging circuit is switched off, and then these dual switches are switched off to take it out of parallel, and then at this moment the circuit is dead. There's no connection at all. And then after these switches are turned off, then these 3 switches are turned on, which in turn connects it into series. And the way that works is it connects, when you turn this switch on, it connects this capacitor's negative to this capacitor's positive. You turn this switch on, connects this capacitor's negative to this capacitor's positive. When you turn this switch on, it connects this capacitor's negative to this capacitor's positive. And then when that's done, all 4 of these capacitors are connected into series. And then the coil on the last capacitor, the negative is connected to the coil. And then on this capacitor, the positive is connected to the positive side of the coil with a trigger switch right here. And for another way, if people don't really get this kind of schematic, I drew a simple schematic that actually shows more of how the capacitor is really hooked up, because I don't have my capacitors in a row like that. I have them in a little group like that. And here's the dual switch right there between these 2 capacitors, the other dual switch, and the other dual switch. Then here's the single switches to connect into series, and my power cutoff switch, which is a dual switch, then the trigger switch. So now I guess I'll show you a little test run of it. I'd shoot the box, but you wouldn't really see much, and those holes are actually from a BB gun if you could see the holes. It can penetrate cardboard, but only at a very, very close range, close to point blank, right about. This is about its max penetration range with this little nail, cut off a little steel nail head, and it shoots any kind of projectile that's magnetic. I want to get it like a small little magnetic, like a permanent magnet that's small enough to fit in that barrel. I want to see how well the magnet will shoot out of it. But let's charge it up. First, let me make sure my switches are off. You need to turn these series switches off. You don't want those on when you go to charge it. And turn the parallel switches on for charging. Let me make sure my switch is functioning, because it's 1,320 volts when connected in series. So it tends to make this stick sometimes, so I've got to make sure it's not sticking, otherwise it won't charge, because it'll dump all the power into the coil instead of into the capacitors. Okay, so let's put my battery in. It's all made of a disposable camera. I'm going to, now after you make the first shot, as long as you don't remove the battery from the charging circuit, you can just turn this switch on, it'll automatically start charging. But since it didn't have the battery in it and I haven't used it probably about an hour, I'll have to press the charging button on the front of the camera. I don't know if you can hear the whistle or not, probably not. It usually doesn't pick up on the camera, but it's charging right now. We're just going to wait for that little light to come on. It's a fresh battery, so it shouldn't take very long. The first shot's usually not as powerful as the second and third and fourth and so on and so on. It tends to charge a little bit better after the first shot's taken. But just wait for that light to come on. It takes about 30 seconds, a little bit longer maybe. I have used this battery a little bit. It's not too fresh. It's not brand new. But alright, and there's the light. Came on. I don't know if you could see it. But now with the lights on, disconnect the charging unit and take it out of parallel first. That way there's no shorts when I switch it over to series. Turn the series switches on. And then now, put the little can in front of it. And here we go. Oh yeah, and the holes in the can are not from this either. Those are also from a BB gun. It's just I just use my targets for everything, you know. But yeah, it's not strong enough to pierce through aluminum cans. But it's pretty decent. It's better than what it was doing, because when I originally made it, I was trying to use all the capacitors in parallel to shoot also instead of switching them over to series. And it didn't really work out. It just kind of more like launched the shit instead of shooting it. But I'm actually kind of pleased. It's pretty good. Works decent. Works better than my little airsoft pocket pistol. I have a pocket pistol, airsoft gun, about a little bit smaller than my hand. And it can't even shoot through a piece of paper. And this, it shot through a piece of paper, and it embedded this nail into the cardboard. And the little airsoft pistol can't even do that at point blank range, so that's pretty good. And it shoots pretty far. It'll shoot about halfway down my driveway over there, just a little bit behind the car. And yep. And yeah, I know I could have used SRCs or SCRs for the switches because they're electronically controlled, but the thing is, they're electronic components, and with dealing with this kind of voltage, I really didn't want to use electronic components for the switches because I didn't want to go spend the money and end up frying them, because I don't know exactly which SCRs to use that can support this voltage for a short brief moment. Like these switches, they're only 125 volt switches, but they can support the quick burst of 1000 volts. And that one kind of can support it. I mean, it sticks. It's probably sticking right now after that shot. Yeah, it's sticking. And that's no big deal. All you have to do is flick it. What that does is the power's so great, it actually welds the metal inside the switch to the, it like welds the metals to each other, like stick welds it. But yeah, I didn't use the SCRs because I didn't want any failures. I wanted to make sure that this worked. So the only electronic components I have to worry about failing is that charging unit and those capacitors, which is no big deal because I didn't pay for those. They were free. It's just cameras that I had. Got all those capacitors out of the cameras. It's one of the cameras. Because I didn't want to go to Radio Shack, spend money on little SCRs, and they end up failing. And that would really suck. It only cost me $12. And that's because I got a pack of these switches. That switch I already had, but I got a pack of 6 switches, 3 singles, 3 doubles. And I bought this little piece of project board. It comes like this, stuck together. And you just break it off, and you got 2 little project boards. It was pretty good. That was only about $3. But and the coil, I'm not sure what gauge magnet wire this is, but I can tell you that I don't even know how many layers it is, but I took a sewing thread spool, a plastic sewing thread spool. You don't want to use a metal one because they're magnetic. You want to use something non-magnetic to hold the coil, and you want to use a barrel that's not magnetic. Like you can use an aluminum barrel, but you don't want to use like a steel barrel or anything like that. So I just went with a little plastic straw because it fit in the spool just fine. I just wrapped that wire all the way around that spool until it started coming up to the top and bulging out of the top of the spool a little bit. So I'm guessing it's probably around an 8-layer coil maybe. But it works pretty well. And I'm pretty satisfied, and now it makes me want to get more capacitors if I can find more photo flash capacitors. And those capacitors are 330 volts each at 120 microfarad. and I want to see if I can get more of them. I want to get like 12 more of them, and then make it and mod the unit to where when the capacitors are in series, I want to make it to where the capacitors are hooked up like this. Where they'll be in parallel, but they can also be connected into series while these two capacitors are still in parallel, and that'll give me more current. So that means 120 microfarads like this. That means these two capacitors connected in parallel would be, let's see, 240 microfarad at 330 volts connected to this. So that would be 240, and that would be, let's see, 480 microfarad at, I'm sorry, I can't do math in my head very well. I have to write it out. I have to actually see the math. Yeah, just that right there, if I connect these four capacitors up like this, to where they're in parallel, and they can be switched over to series while two of them are still in parallel, that'll give me 660 volts at 480 microfarad. So that'll increase the current. Right now, it's still operating at 120 microfarad, but at 1320 volts. But that's my little coil gun, and I kind of want to make a more powerful one, because I'd like to see this little nail shoot straight through all kinds of shit. And I would really like to get a barrel that can fit the BBs, the little BB gun BBs, because that would be perfect, because I got shit tons of those. You can buy those, so I wouldn't have to make ammo for it. At least make a gun powerful enough to shoot nails, because then I could just buy a pack of nails. And those have a lot of kinetic energy because they're heavy. And if I can get that heavy object flying at 300 feet per second, it'll do some damage. But that's the gun, and that's pretty much it.